Bono. And it was really about this issue of the competition between climate change and poverty reduction. In your work at the foundation, are you finding that competition? Are you finding one is driving out the other more, particularly of late? And what are you going to do about it?
Thanks, Tom. And Tom, thanks for doing this.
My pleasure.
It means a lot to all of us. At the morning talk, it was almost like it was set up between Al and Bono, antipodes of a conversation. Climate change versus poverty, the funds, the discussion, the public concept. And it was all about a gas, an atmospheric gas, but I thought it was not about carbon dioxide. I thought it was about oxygen. Because it's true that climate change takes all the oxygen out of the room, and it takes all the momentum out of people who've spent their life committed working against poverty. And it shouldn't be like that. Not only are the poor in the developing world the greatest victims of climate change, but if we don't grow economic development in the right way, they will contribute, as in China and in India, to climate change in a way that we won't be able to bring it back. So I can't imagine a better statement. I heard President Clinton say that the growing disparity between rich and poor and the marginalization of poor people, it is unequal, unfair, unstable, and unsustainable. And it contributes to insecurity around the world. We need to be mindful of all these things. You know, the good news, I think, about our generation is that whether we're ADD or we can parallel process, we've got to be big enough and grown up enough to be able to simultaneously handle more than one threat. So what we're doing about it is we announced 5 initiatives. 2 of them are on poverty. And
go through the 5.
Go through the 5?
Yeah, just real quick.
So taking it from poverty first, I was in Africa. Many of you were, I recognize your faces, at the TED conference, and there was this big fight between aid and trade, aid and trade. But if you talk to poor people in the developing world, they're not going to say, I want more aid, more foreign aid. They say, I want a job. I want to be able to feed my family and care for my family. And I want government services that work, education for my kids, health care, electrification, water. So we decided that those were twin halves of the problem of poverty and economic development. So one of our initiatives is to empower people, not just poor people, but starting off with poor people in the developing world, so that they know what public services, government and other public services, are available, and empower them to take advantage, to avail of, and to have access to these services. Governments are not bad. We have this illusion that third world governments are corrupt and incompetent. There's some wonderful governments in the developing world, and sometimes they just don't have the tools to deliver what they want to do. So the other half is to try to help governments develop those tools, and that draws on Google's technology and our information services. The other initiative in the area of poverty is job creation. And 2/3 of all the jobs in the United States are created by small and medium-sized enterprises. You'd think it was the same in the developing world. It's not. Less than 15% of all the jobs in the developing world are created by small and medium-sized enterprises. The bulk of jobs now are created by these big, large corporations, mostly extraction industry. So if we can fire up the small and medium-sized entrepreneur, that's where all the jobs will come from, and we hope to be able to play a role in that. In the area of health, and in particularly the area of pandemics and emerging communicable diseases, there have been 36 new diseases that have jumped from animals to humans in the last 30 years, any one of which under the wrong circumstances could become pandemic. One of which already has, HIV/AIDS is a pandemic, and it jumped from monkeys to humans. We worry about bird flu and SARS, but there's also Ebola, Lassa fever, Marburg. If you chant them in a religious way, all these diseases, you realize something's changed. And so what we're trying to do is to fund early warning systems and increase the availability of good response. And then lastly, what we were talking about this morning, are issues in energy and climate change, which Larry and Sergey are going to talk a lot more about. On the one hand, and I really appreciate, Al, you saying that RE less than C captures the imagination of the problem. And what Larry said in the press conference is a little bit wonky, but or a little nerdy. I forgot what you said. It was something like that. But it really captures the equation exactly right. until you can create utility-grade electricity from renewable energy at a price cheaper than coal, the coal will be burned. I lived in India 10 years. Every lump of coal will be burned unless there's a cheaper way to produce electricity. So we're really committed to that, and I'll let Larry or Sergey or both talk about what we're doing inside of Google to mount an opportunity to create our own 1 gigawatt renewable energy production facility. The flip of that equation, though, is, as you said, we have to be able to internalize the externalities of bad health consequences of coal, because that equation only works when it's the right cost, the fully loaded cost of coal and the fully loaded cost of renewables. The last of our climate initiatives is to try to create a world in which not only the coal stays in the ground, but the oil stays in the ground, the petroleum, the gasoline isn't consumed. And that really means electric cars. It might mean temporarily plug-in hybrids. But so long as you plug into a grid that is mostly coal, you get some marginal improvements, but not substantial improvements. If you have a grid which is green and you plug into a green grid, in the combination, those two things really deal with almost 50% of all of greenhouse gas emissions. So I didn't mean to take so much time, but those are our 5 initiatives.
Terrific. Larry, let me start with you. Take us back to your own internal conversations about RE less than C, which stands for renewable energy cheaper than coal. Why you decided to go into the energy space. It's a big move for Google. And what do you think a company like Google could bring to the goal of 1 gigawatt of clean power, enough to power San Francisco, that maybe others haven't?
Yeah, I think we were really lucky to be at the intersection of a bunch of different things. Being in Silicon Valley, you know, we had lots of friends and companies all working in the renewable energy area. We also had this sort of relentless demand for people on the internet to do things. So people searching and email and all those things.
How did that manifest itself? How did you sort of,
Well,
how did you notice that?
Well, we actually have to buy computers to hold everybody's email and everybody's searches and the web and just huge numbers of computers and the energy to power those. And we want Google to work. You don't want to go to Google and say, "Oh, sorry, we're busy right now." That would be really bad. So we're forced to be very practical about that. And so we've had a team going around building data centers and finding energy and so on. And so and doing that worldwide. So we want our service to be fast everywhere. And because of that, we really noticed, well, we're getting, we have some facilities, for example, that are close to dams and so on. But a lot of times we're really displacing somebody else who would use that energy. It's not that by building a data center next to a dam, the dam's already being used. Right. And maybe, there's not quite as much transmission as there would have been, but it's not that that's such a green way of doing it. And, many places, you basically see that, we would see in buying a lot of electricity, where you get it cheaply, it's from coal. And, the business side of our company is saying, well, let's buy the cheap electricity and make sure, our bottom line is good and all that. And, we're kind of looking at this isn't good, right? Computers are using more and more electricity. People are doing more things with them. And actually the cost of your computing that's electricity is going up as a percentage. It's actually pretty significant. It might even approach the cost of the computers themselves. And because of that, we said, well, why aren't we making renewable energy cheaper than you would get it from coal? That would be the easy decision to make. Say we're going to get it cheaply and, it's going to be green. And there's tons of startups in the space. We've invested in some. We have friends in many different ones. And the problem we had is that all the startups, they can basically have an incredible business making electricity at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And the reason is there's tremendous demand for renewable energy. I mean, we would buy it at a higher price, but you're not going to fundamentally change the game unless it's cheaper than coal. Right. And the problem for a startup, they're looking at it, well, we want to succeed. We can make it at 10 cents and succeed, but we really need to make it at 3 cents to really change the world. And we want those projects that could be 3 cents to start right now. And we're willing to take, the risks on those things. And obviously, if you succeed at one of those things, you're going to have a great business. But it's very rational for a startup to say, we're not going to take that risk. We're going to take, we're going to produce it at the 10 cents, and we're going to have a great business. And we want our business to grow slowly. And our primary goal is not to fix the world, right? Whereas we have a little bit of the luxury of driving some of those projects forward. So I think we saw that there wasn't enough investment in some of those things. And we also saw, we talked to enough people that, if you really push the startups and the people who are really smart on these things, you say, well, do you guys have a way of doing it at 3 cents? They say, yeah, we do. It's a little bit modestly higher risk, but we have a clear path to get there. And we're like, well, why don't we get going on that now? What do you need? You need some people and a little bit of money and so on. But it's a relatively modest resource.
Sergey, tell us a little bit about where the initiative is right now. Are you exploring different clean power alternatives? Which ones attract you? Sort of where are they? And what can a Google bring to this that an ExxonMobil or a Chevron can't?
Well, just first off, where we are right now, we highlighted 3 areas of renewable energy that we thought would be good initial focuses: solar thermal, also deep geothermal, and actually, what was the number 3? Wind. Good point. High altitude wind. Right. I should clarify specifically.
Why those 3? Sorry. As you winnowed them down,
we were looking at the options around at the time. I think there are potentially a few others that could make the cut. If I had to add one, I would say photovoltaics. But I think these are 3 that are known into the renewable energy community, but not broadly kind of thought about and well understood. And currently, for example, if you look at wind power, the windmills are on par with coal today. Now they're intermittent power, in the sense you can't just rely on wind always being there, but they're already pretty good. We think that it can be even cheaper by using high altitude wind, and we highlighted one company that we're working with called Makani. They use kites at potentially high altitudes to generate, and it's kites much cheaper to make than a big metal windmill. So that's a really interesting one. If you imagine getting power that cheap, I mean, that could be substantially cheaper than coal. The other one, solar thermal, is pretty well known. I mean, you already see these things with the big parabolic trenches and the solar towers and whatnot. And it's something that it just seems like there's just a little bit of really basic just engineering and development to make that be really cheap. I mean, there's no inherent barrier in the way if you kind of, you just need so much mirrored surface and you can kind of do the math. And the existing companies, it's the situation that Larry said. They feel that if they can produce it at 10 cents, which they take a more conservative engineering route, they'll still have a great business. We want to push them a little bit more, saying, we're willing to risk these maybe being not quite as 100% guaranteed to pan out, but we wanted to bring it down to 3 cents or something like that.
So just to technically how you're doing it, you've found a stable of companies in these different areas, and then you've invested in them.
So we have done investment in both solar thermal as well as the high altitude wind. We think that we should have some of these things going on in-house. We don't have the in-house research going on yet, but we are hiring in those areas. And deep geothermal is actually another example of one, because there's existing geothermal if you look at Iceland or something like that. And those, in those areas that have that, that works pretty well for them. But it's not necessarily, dirt cheap. I guess it's kind of dirt cheap, literally. But it's anyway, there's reason to believe that if you go really deep and actually take advantage of the technology that the dirty industries have created in terms of drilling and whatnot, that you can actually have geothermal power be cheap and available almost everywhere around the world. And that's really exciting. That's a little bit farther off. This is where you don't really see startups because it requires more fundamental research.
We should say the gentleman from Aeromet, I think, is here. And they have 400 megawatts of geothermal that they own even. So there's a lot of great work going on in those areas.
Larry, Larry Page, 2 questions. One is, what is it, you guys have been an amazing innovation company in the area of search. What's the difference between doing innovation in something like search, bits and bytes, and doing innovation in something like energy, which is atoms, molecules, in terms of, being able to really do this kind of breakthrough innovation? What's the difference in working in these two areas?
I mean, I don't find it to be that different. I mean, we've had a fair amount of work that's gone on just making our data centers efficient, and actually a lot of the people and knowledge we've had in pursuing some of the energy-related things are those people. Like, they're basically borrowing those people a little bit from their day jobs, and hopefully Google will still answer your query and so on. And we've had just wonderful people in those areas. I think what you need are people who are willing to take a new way of doing things and so on, and who know enough about the area to make some progress.
What's been the reaction of the energy companies, the ExxonMobil? Suddenly they wake up one morning, they read in the paper that Google's going into the energy business. And these are companies that have historically, Al Gore and I were talking about this on the way over, they're expert at pushing things into the future. And it seems to me you guys actually want to claim the future now, as opposed to always keeping the future just 10 years out, What's been their reaction?
I haven't talked to many of them. I would suspect that the reaction is different depending on which one. Like Exxon, I don't know that would be the same as BP, for example. But some of these companies, like BP, are certainly very interested in investing in these clean technologies. I think we have a little bit of benefit that we don't have an existing business that we're worried about cannibalizing or anything like that. We bring that to the table. I do want to highlight one important difference between doing like web search and things like that and the energy business, or at least web search when we started it. Right now, if you want to prove a success in energy, there's a certain scale you have to achieve. Otherwise, you can't demonstrate the cost effectiveness of your product. And that probably means putting in $100 million plant or something like that. I mean, there's a big bet at some point that you have to make, and it takes a lot of capital. And we feel at this maturation of our company that we actually have a fair amount of capital, and we're willing to probably be riskier with it than other companies. Like, we can take a chance on a data center. I think that puts us in a position to do things that other companies wouldn't.
I'm going to get to Larry Brilliant in a second, but apropos of that, Larry Page, what's been the reaction of your shareholders?
I mean, I think it's been fine. I think I mean, we stated we would make probably capital investments in hundreds of millions of dollars that would generate positive returns. And I think we said just what Sergey just said. We would take some more risk in those, but it would be modest, and we'd still expect them to net out positive. And we're already doing that in the course of building out our infrastructure in data centers and so on. So I think that reaction was fine. And in terms of hiring people and really getting these projects going, I mean, those are, if we could hire 1,000 people who are really excited about doing this, we would. But we're not going to find those people.
Interesting. Larry Brilliant, one of the things we talked about at the morning session is I've always had this feeling it's much more important to change your leaders than your light bulbs, because leaders write rules shape markets give you scale. But one of the problems we've had, you almost couldn't make this up, and people don't realize, because it was actually badly reported, we just passed an energy bill where we threw out the incentives, or we did not include the incentives for wind and solar, and we maintained those for oil, gas, and coal. Mitt Romney just won a Michigan primary in the Republican Party by promising to get rid of the mileage standards just passed by Congress. That is dumb as we want to be. You could not make that up, but we just did that. Now, how do you succeed in this space without taking, pardon the editorializing, but I don't have a column now and I had to get it out, It's all right. But if you want to know, I really think, but can you succeed in this space? I'm interested in all three of you, without taking more of a political position.
So what do they do in law? They say, I'd like to incorporate by reference his comments. I'm accused often of being maybe a little rosy-eyed, I think, or rosy glasses, whatever the expression is. Where's Bono? He'll help me. The people who have fought against protecting us against climate change, a very, very small percentage of them are bad people. I mean, you'd be disingenuous if you didn't recognize that some very small percentage of them are bad people. They have children, they have grandchildren. Whether they call it earth stewardship or they call it protecting their kids from using the science. They're good people. We have somehow failed to articulate in the most compelling way the urgency of the moment. Let me just take a moment to say, when we talked earlier about the conflict between poverty and climate, I think this is an extraordinarily sophisticated audience. But you know, I had a conversation with Muhammad Yunus, who's been a friend for 30 years, and think of his whole body of work. 5 million women who've had loans, all of them have paid it back because of microcredit. Moving into telephony, we have a deal with him where the Seva Foundation will do surgery on blind people, and he'll give a microcredit loan to people who are blind. Bangladesh and the rest of the world has benefited from everything he's done, all of which will be washed away if you have a sea rise of 3 meters. So you can't separate the quest for dignity and fighting against poverty and climate change. And I think that, and so he gets it now. Muhammad Yunus gets it. People working in the development world get it. They know that while they want to battle urgently for the hurt that poor people feel today, you know, the 2 million who died this year of malaria, they also know that with climate change it'll be 5 or 7 million dying every year. We have failed to get that degree of awareness and understanding in Congress and in Senate and in the political leadership. It's our failure. We can't give up on that. So the areas that we're taking aim at, I guess, because you've got to be focused. We're very interested in internalizing the externalities, the negative health externalities of coal. When you dig for coal, you kill people, miners die, they get black lung disease, they get other respiratory disease, their children and our children miss school, we miss work for respiratory diseases caused by coal. You only have to be in Beijing for a moment to understand that. So the regulatory issues, the policy issues about how we truly, what's the true costing for coal? It's not just the marginal cost of extracting 1 lump of coal. It's what does society pay for it? I liken it to the secondhand smoking issue. And that's where I think we can go.
How do we reframe the debate, though? So you get, Al quoted these numbers, this morning of, nearly 3,000 questions asked up to now on the Sunday morning talk shows and in all the debates, and 3 on climate in this election. And as Al said, there were 3 on UFOs. So climate and UFOs are now equal, What are we doing? What is Google doing? What is the plan to reframe the debate?
Well, earlier I think Bono said this would be the first, maybe Al said, the first time that public movement took place in order to raise taxes if we were looking for cap and trade and something like that. I think it's much more compelling to look at what happened with secondhand smoking. There was a time, how many of you remember when all the chief executive officers of all the tobacco companies raised their hand and said, no, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt anybody at all. I smoke it all the time. We need to reframe the debate. We need to understand the negative consequences of the way in which we are developing our world. And coal is a great example. And that's a role that we can play. We can fund research with credible researchers who will identify all the externalities of coal. It shouldn't be Google saying we don't like coal. It should be, here are the best researchers in the world, and we're going to give them grants so they can cost that out. Those are the kinds of things I think we can do far more effectively than going to Washington and saying, we're Google, you got to stop digging for coal. Mm-hmm. That is not going to necessarily have the desired effect.
Okay. Larry, knowing what you guys know now about the energy business and how we get to scale, we're going to have an election. We will have a new president. Apropos of that issue, what do you think would be the most helpful thing in terms of your own project that the next president, him or her, decides on day one around the energy space? What would be most helpful for getting your project to scale?
I mean, I don't know, the best possible thing. One thing that I'm very concerned about is transmission. Mm-hmm. And I just like to tell the story. I went to University of Michigan in engineering, and like 20 years before I got there, they closed their power transmission school. They had a school that dealt with high-tension wires and power transmission, and that was closed long, long before I got there. And, unsurprisingly, that area hasn't advanced that much. And I'm pretty concerned. What Sergey mentioned about wind is very true. The cost of a windmill, the power is competitive with coal now, except for transmission and the variability. And if you have better transmission, that really helps you with the variability. There's been studies that show, for example, Europe could get 90% of their electricity from wind at a cost equal to coal, 90% just from wind at the same cost as coal if they had better transmission. Now, it's kind of terrible that there's nobody working on that, right, as far as I could tell, or very, very few people. And even if we did have technologies that were better for the transmission, the ones we have are probably good enough to, solve Europe's energy needs. But the odds that they'll get deployed, across a wide area like that are probably close to zero without somebody, like a U.S. president or somebody powerful saying, we're going to build really good transmission so that we can have better renewable energy and solve some of these problems.
Give us kind of interstate highway system for the grid.
Yeah, right now, if you order a transformer, 3 years is expedited delivery. We know that because we order transformers. So I think, in that kind of environment, we're not going to see very fast progress on solving these energy issues. So I'd say transmission. We should just assume that we're going to need better transmission. It would be nice to, use more energy than we use now and have it be renewable. And we're not going to get any of those things unless we have better transmission, and that's got to be a governmental issue.
Sergey, other than transmission, what would be yours? What do you think the next president could do that would be most helpful?
I think that we want to be on an equal playing field between renewables and coal and dirty energy. I think people kind of underappreciate right now. They think like, well, all these renewables want all these subsidies and taxes on the dirty technologies. But the situation right now is very opposite of that. If you just look at, Larry mentioned the pulmonary disease effects of coal, not to mention the particulates of, say, of a lot of our transportation. If you look at, well, the Iraq War, which, whether you believe that the U.S. is in there for oil or not, certainly the reason that Saddam had all that military might was because of the oil money that we paid. If you look at things like the cost you put on renewables, the tariffs on Brazilian ethanol right now, because I would today, sure, I'd run my car in Brazilian sugarcane ethanol, but the tariffs make it prohibitive, even though it's the equivalent of like $30 to $40 a barrel in Brazil today. I have friends who have electric car companies, and if you look at kind of the regulatory hurdles they have to go through to get their cars on the road, all the crash testing and whatnot. Now, it's true that car companies do all the crash testing on their gas cars, but they don't on the motorcycles, and the motorcycles are unsafe. So why not a budding young company can sell, a few hundred electric vehicles prior to having to go through all that, which may very well be very safe. And also, none of these car companies are forced to consider the safety of the people that they hit. It's kind of a funny thing that. I also having, we've installed a lot of solar capacity on our campus.
Talk about that a little bit, what you guys have done, what you've learned from your own experience.
I think we're over 1.6 megawatts, something like that now. We installed them on the roofs of our buildings, as well as we built carports and things like that. And, it's been great. I mean, it creates shade. It reduces our power costs. It's been a good investment. But there were a lot of hurdles. And most of the hurdles aren't technical and they're not financial. They're just regulatory. By the time you get all the permits to do this, that, and the other. And these aren't, I don't think these are people sort of conspiring against clean technology. It's just, by the time you add up all the federal, state, and, local government, zoning, planning, whatnot, it adds up to a really big burden. Whereas if you kind of use status quo technologies, just plug me into the grid, you don't have to do anything. Somebody just shows up. A friend of mine recently installed a fiber to his office building and had to cross little creeks, so they had to put up a post. And all these people showed up, and they had to verify that it would withstand like 200-mile-an-hour wind or whatnot. And the guy who erected it, who normally puts it up for the power company there, PG&E, said, oh, yeah, PG&E doesn't really have to listen to any of those regulations. I just put up a pole, I don't have to go through any of that. So there's just all these hidden barriers to clean energy today that don't exist for dirty energy, and that's the truth of the world as it stands today.
Larry Page, one of the things that Google.org is trying to do is unlock entrepreneurship in the developing world as a way of overcoming poverty. And a lot of people have taken a crack at that and have failed. What do you think you guys could bring or are bringing to that initiative that might make it work where others have failed?
Well, I think the problems you have left in the developing world are the really, really hard ones. And I've tried to take a lot of vacation time and travel around there and really try to understand what's going on. And, there's been already tremendous work by very many different people, a lot of which are in this room here. So I think, we're going to try to do something more. We've been running things like business plan competitions, which I've seen personally some of the results of. And I think the things that I've seen that have been successful in these areas, aren't like massive amounts of labor, but, it's a very careful kind of seeded attempt to just generate a little bit of knowledge in local people, like, oh, you should have a business plan. You should think about what you're going to do and then compete about it and talk about it and learn how to do that.
Talk about that. What you started a competition around business plans. Talk about that a little bit.
I mean, that's basically it. You just have local entrepreneurs. You have a big event. You give out a prize, a little bit of money for the winner, which gets the winner ability to get funding and all those things. And just that whole mechanism, until in Silicon Valley, this is what people do for breakfast. They know how to do that, and in Kenya or somewhere they've never seen that before. But once you get that started and you get a community around it, you have a few hundred people involved first, and then you get thousands and so on. I think that's how you're going to make progress. It's with local people and some idea that makes sense there, and really just growing that and making it happen. And I do think that having a lot of enterprise. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in these places, but having a little bit of organized enterprise, having some of the things that we've learned how to do, just getting that idea into people's heads is really important. Like you go to these places and you're like, well, they don't have any debt financing. I was in Ghana, for example, recently, and they don't have any debt financing for houses, really. And you're like, well, no wonder it's hard for people to buy houses. There's no way to borrow money to buy a house. You can't secure it, right? We've discovered that's an important thing, right? And so somehow just getting that idea and then the people there are obviously very capable, and they can really run with those things once people know about that and know.
So when you made aware of a problem like that, do you then call up Larry and say, hey, is there some way we can get either financing to local banks or start our own, or what do you do with an idea like that?
I mean, I think we just try to talk about them. It's not. I mean, I think again, these are the problems that are really hard that haven't been solved yet, and a lot of people have been working on them. And so there's usually 10 different things standing in your way. You don't have a body of law. Like I don't think the way they do land ownership there, or a lot of these countries, you don't really know who owns the land, or you don't have clear titles, so it's hard to have debt based on that. And so you just run into the reason why it's not solved is because there's 10 things that need to be done. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try to do those things, right?
Sergey, talk about what you've learned from China and India in the energy space. You obviously compete, in China in the field of search. What do you see going on there that excites you or not about in the energy field?
Well, I think primarily in China, I'm a little bit stressed out about the energy space. I mean, the number of coal plants that are going up there. I mean, that's going to be a really big challenge. I think it is important for us to solve the problem in the U.S. Kind of unilaterally and first, ahead of pushing the developing countries. But I do think that we need to do it quickly before it's too late in those other countries. And I think there's a lot of reason for hope there too. If I'm going to drift a little bit further afield to Bhutan, which my wife and I visited a year and a half ago, and you do this treks there, and we hiked up, and you go really high, you get altitude sickness, you're up in the middle of nowhere, and the only people you run into are these yak herders. They don't really have anything. They just have a little tarp they put over a few rocks. They have their yak, which are wandering around far away, and they only had one piece of technology, two. They had a solar cell and an LED light. And it was the most amazing thing because
they must have a battery also.
That's true. They did have a battery too. Anyway, and you walk around. I mean, it's really, you're in a really, remote part of the world, kind of up on the, kind of in the sky. And that's what they have there, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, first they have a legal system where they are trying to prevent deforestation, so people can't just chop down trees to create, their fire endlessly. I mean, they're allowed to take some, and they use that for cooking, but they don't use that for their just night light that they need. And it turns out to be really, even though for them, I'm sure it's expensive to buy a solar cell, it's still really cheap compared to the alternatives. And I think that makes sense in a lot of places around the world. In Africa, for example, where you don't have the transmission lines, you don't have great roads to transport the diesel fuel, and not to mention it's $100 a barrel now anyway. All these places, even at today's photovoltaic prices, it makes a lot of sense to install photovoltaics. And I think you're going to see that trend accelerate because this technology is becoming cheaper and more ubiquitous. And nothing is really improving in the dirty space.
Do you notice, in terms of Google Trends, and if you've looked at this or if you can, in terms of what are people searching for in terms of solutions? Climate change, energy, clean energy, solar. Do you see anything showing up there in Google Trends at all?
I haven't really looked at that, but I think people are definitely much more aware of these things, and it's hard. I think it's hard for everyday people to know what to do. I mean, you have the compact fluorescence and so on, but I think a lot of the changes that need to get made are the bigger issues: transmission and bringing down costs and all those things.
I want to open it to the floor. We have so many